Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for your patience. We are very excited to kick things off here. Our webinar today is Has the U.S. Reached Full Employment? Recruiting in today's webinar. In today's economy. My name is Molly Mosley, and I am SVP of Marketing here at LinkUp. And I'm going to introduce Toby in a second. He is our President and CEO of LinkUp, and he will be our key presenter today. But before I get started, just a couple quick housekeeping items, which you're all pretty well aware of. You are in listen-only mode, but please use your control panel to field questions, or if you have any issues with audio, we will be paying attention to that. We're going to go through the questions at the end, and if I don't get to yours specifically, we will follow up with you in the next day or two. So before I introduce Toby and turn things over, just a little bit about LinkUp and kind of our value proposition and what makes us unique and also provides us with this data that we're going to be sharing with you today. We exclusively index jobs on company websites. So currently we have over 3.5 million jobs from 50,000 employer websites. We do offer employers and agencies a performance-based model of pay-per-click recruiting. We also have a highly curated national network, the mobile app, and of course now, which we'll be talking about, all of our data and analytics that we can provide further insight in our space. As mentioned, I am joined with our presenter, Toby Dayton, President and CEO of both JobDig and LinkUp. He comes from a tremendous background of working with different technology consulting companies, also does a lot of labor market information, and is a contributor on Bloomberg. What might be debatable is he proclaims that he is our best Catan player in the company. I'll let him go into a little bit more detail on that, but again, I would encourage you to challenge that. And he also loves to play golf and spend most of his time with his wife and 3 boys. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to Toby. He's got a lot of really great content that he is excited to share.
Thanks, Molly, and welcome everyone. Thanks to everybody who's joined us for today. What we hope will be an interesting and insightful webinar on what really has become a pretty critical topic these days, not just for the broader macroeconomy, but for all of you as recruiters and business leaders. It really is a central issue for your businesses clearly, but also from a broader sense, the questions around whether we are or are not in an environment of full employment has really become critical to policymakers at the Fed as they are debating what to do in terms of interest rates and the broader policies around the economy. So it is a very, very timely topic that we are happy to provide some insights to today. So I'll sort of jump to the conclusion, which is, and we'll provide obviously a lot of depth to this and elaborate on this more fully as we get into the webinar, but we are pretty confident and have pretty high degree of conviction around our view that we are in fact in a period of full employment. And it is, I think what makes it a really interesting question is that it's not a clear-cut black and white case. I think there are, in a lot of ways, equally compelling evidence on the case for being in full employment and the case against. Again, we'll lend some evidence to why we think we are in that period of full employment, but it is certainly an interesting debate with lots of conflicting signals. So we'll walk through both of those and provide a little bit of backdrop on the broader macroeconomy as well. So before we jump in, we'll touch on briefly, and I'm sure this is not a surprise to anyone, what full employment is. It's basically an environment where everybody who is willing and able to work is employed. That's sort of the baseline definition. From a more technical or from a sort of an economist standpoint, the definition of full employment is an environment where there is no cyclical or deficient demand unemployment. Others would define it as an acceptable level of unemployment greater than 0% due to frictional or structural unemployment. basically what those mean is that there is no slack in the labor market, and that really is a key from our standpoint. I think from a general standpoint, that is really the defining characteristic of being in full employment, where there is no slack in the environment. And that really is what's critical, because, and yet the last definition of full employment is that employment rate above which inflation starts to rise, wages and salaries in particular. So that is when all the slack has been worked out of the labor market, the next step is that wages start to go up, and at basic economic principles of supply and demand, that is really what is inevitably starts to happen when it becomes harder and harder to find people. The next step is to start raising wages in that fierce competition for people, and that really is, in our view, what lends the most credibility to the fact that we are in that period of full employment, because we are very much starting to see broad-based inflation in wages and salaries really across the entire economy. But as I said at the outset, it really is it is not a clear-cut case of black and white. If you pick up a newspaper today, I think it's pretty obvious that it's almost split down the middle, that about half the stories are pointing to concerns about the economy, where things are headed, indicators of weakness. There's a little bit of indications that we might even be headed into a recession. So there's about half of the stories out there today point to a weakening economy and concerns about the labor market. And yet on the other half, you're going to see lots of stories that point to a strengthening labor market, a strong, robust economy that looks to be continuing to improve over time. So it really is, I think it's a case where, again, there are lots of examples to point to from both an anecdotal standpoint and from a macro standpoint that make both sides of this argument pretty compelling. So against that backdrop, we'll just sort of cover quickly some of the macro indicators. And again, I think really in a lot of ways this is really focused primarily around the first quarter of this year and the start to 2016. There was pretty weak GDP growth in the first quarter. Business spending is down. Consumer spending is down from highs last year. Corporate earnings are down, and a lot of concern about pretty anemic productivity growth. So again, there are lots of really strong data points that would point to a weakening economy, and I think all of those should give us pause about how we think about what the economy holds in the next couple of quarters. But on the other side, again, there are lots of very positive indicators that I think also paint a very, very optimistic picture about what we might be able to expect for the remainder of this year. The Fed released their Beige Book in April that pointed to broad economic expansion across most regions of the country. Real estate values continue to rise. There is, on the previous slide, there was certainly global weakness was one of the factors, but China has indications now that it's stabilizing. The dollar is weakening, which helps exports. So there are some signs that we might be able to expect a little bit more strength in exports. So again, lots of pretty significant macro indicators that would point to some encouraging signs in the broader economy. And of course, probably among all these bullet points, the strongest indicators for the economy really center around the labor market, which continues to be really, really impressive, and I think gives a lot of people optimism for what the economy is going to look like for the next couple of quarters. So against that sort of broader macro backdrop, we'll drill down into the labor market a little bit before we get into the pros and cons of whether we are or not in a full employment environment. And I think it's, again, not surprising to anybody that the labor market for the last 3 years, even by some measures the last 5 years, the labor market has been incredibly strong. We have in April was the 67th consecutive month of net job gains, which is just an incredible string of monthly numbers that is really unprecedented. And I think it speaks not only to how strong the labor market is, but also how significant the recession was that we have been climbing out of. And again, this slide, it really again points to both of those cases. I think this was one of the slides that had become quite familiar to people who were tracking what was going on during the Great Recession. The red line is the Great Recession that began in 2007, and the magnitude of job losses during that period was really unprecedented since the Depression. And since that time, again, as you start to stack up 67 consecutive months of job gains, you start to see what has happened as we've recovered from that and are now, again, in a really, really strong labor market with very, very low unemployment. Obviously, not surprisingly, the unemployment rate has dropped over the last 5 years from a peak of 10% to what it is today at just about 5%. So again, the unemployment rate continuing to trend down through that period of time. As well, what has happened through that period of time is that the rate of growth in those employed in the country has outpaced the employment population. Not surprisingly, but that is really, when you put those two lines together, again speaks to the rate of job growth and the accelerating job growth that has taken place over the last couple of years. This slide also is one of the factors that is contributing to the assessment that we are in a full employment environment. When the employment population ratio is not growing as fast as job growth, you start to get some significant supply and demand imbalances. The other thing, a couple of other last data points, jobless claims have reached 40-year lows. We haven't seen this level of jobless claims since the 70s. So again, we're really in lots of ways unprecedented territory in terms of what is going on in the labor market. The other key number in the monthly, Labor Department's monthly JOLTS number is how significant, the significant rise in job openings. In the most recent reporting period, they indicated that there are 5.75 million job openings now in the U.S. Again, a 40-year high in terms of job openings. And all of that has really led to, I think, the most clear indication of being in a full employment environment, the fact that we are starting to see very, very clear signals of rising wages. Wage inflation has started to creep up. It has been long and slow in coming, but it is there, and the evidence is increasingly pointing to accelerating wage inflation. So all of that, again, is sort of a backdrop for the evidence for and against being in a period of full employment. Again, just to sort of recap some of those highlights, the case against full employment, there are still 6 million workers involuntarily in part-time jobs. And again, that speaks to the fact that there may still be some slack in the labor market as those workers are actively pursuing full-time work and hopefully will come back into full-time employment. The labor force participation rate is at, as I said, 40-year lows. So that, again, points to the fact that there may be more slack than in the labor market. And as I said on the last slide, wage inflation has been lower and slower than a lot of people would expect at this point in the recovery. It has been accelerating of late, but it has been a long time coming, and I think people point to it still being on the very, very low levels, not as a strong indicator of being in a full employment environment. And the other fact is that this year, monthly net job gains have paced a little bit lower than they did last year. So some people, again, are pointing to that fact as an indicator that we still have some slack and the job growth is not quite as robust as others might expect. One of the big unknowns in this current environment is what to make of the huge number of people in the country who are working in what people call alternative work arrangements. There was a recent study that came out by Intuit that estimated that 54 million Americans today are working in freelance jobs. That is a huge part of the U.S. workforce. And I think they point to the fact that they expect that to grow to 60 million by 2020. That is really, in a lot of ways, it's kind of the wild card in this whole discussion, because I think, again, it's pretty unprecedented. There are a lot of questions around whether those people are going to be returning to the more traditional jobs the way we've defined them for the last couple of decades, or whether this freelance, this gig economy is a more permanent fixture in the U.S. labor market today. And so I again, sort of put this as some people can look at this as a positive, that there's slack still in the labor market, those people will come in. Others are estimating that that is a more permanent fixture. So it's really hard in a lot of ways to know exactly how that's going to play out over the next couple of years. Certainly something that people are paying very, very close attention to. And I'll put this slide up again as sort of a summary slide for the case for full employment. And again, this is really where we come out in our assessment of being in an environment of full employment. Again, just to recap, 6.4 million jobs have been added to the U.S. economy since 2014. Very, very strong, robust job growth. Unemployment is sitting at a very, very low levels. And the expectations are that employers are continuing to indicate that they expect hiring to continue well into the future. Another recent study indicated that employers are seeking to, across the board, increase the number of new graduates they're hiring by significant rates above where they were a year or two ago. So again, I think that by all accounts, all of those are really the pillars as we would define a case for full employment. And like this sign indicates, this type of an environment in full employment has huge implications for employers and businesses throughout the country. So the way that we think about it, is that in this kind of a period, the way we think about being in a period of full employment is that there are really sort of four phases that companies will go through as they start to address the enormous challenges that arise in recruiting. This is, and I don't think this is a surprise to anybody on the call, that this is an incredibly challenging period of time to be filling open recs today in this kind of environment. And that really is, in lots of ways, is sort of introduces that first phase, that the time to fill those open recs is growing. It has been growing for some time, and I think that really presents some significant challenges to recruiters, really in every industry across the country, every region across the country. There was a great story last month in the Wall Street Journal talking about the challenges that Salesforce has had in their recruiting in and around the Bay Area. And the head of recruiting at Salesforce was quoted as saying literally that they were getting their asses handed to them by business leaders in the company because they had so many open recs and had so many challenges filling those positions. So clearly that longer time to fill creates a lot of frustration in businesses that are growing and expanding and are trying to source open recs. And as those remain open and as the recruiting challenges really persist, I think the second phase that we have seen is that companies are starting to increase recruiting costs. And I think, again, it goes back to sort of basic supply demand economics, that as it becomes harder and harder to source candidates, costs are going to go up. And we see that in click rates going up. We see that in cost per applicant rates going up, and eventually it makes it all the way to cost per hire. Across the board, those trends are pretty apparent, really, across our entire client base, that costs are starting to go up quite significantly. As the issue continues to persist, as those challenges remain, the third phase of being in a full employment environment are that companies are going to start to have to increase salaries and wages to be much more competitive in attracting candidates, to retain their current workforce, and again, fill all of the open recs. It is natural that salaries and wages, benefits, other kinds of human capital costs are going to start to creep up. And again, going back to some of the indicators that I mentioned earlier, those signs are starting to become very clear in the data that are coming out of what's going on in the economy. And lastly, probably the most severe phase of being in a full employment environment is that businesses really have to start to think about adjustments, not just tactically in terms of their human capital, but strategically in the way they are thinking about their businesses, thinking about ways to expand and grow, where they're locating facilities, and being much more successful in attracting the talent that they need to compete in the future. So I'll focus primarily in terms of some practical advice. I will focus a little bit on those first two phases, really on the candidate sourcing side. It's obviously much closer to our area of expertise here at LinkUp. It also allows me to be a little bit self-serving, and we can just simply recommend massive increases in your advertising budgets, which obviously helps our business. But I think, to be serious, there are some things that we would recommend that employers do to really improve their ability to source candidates in what is undoubtedly a very challenging time in recruiting. And it really comes down to identifying and really scrutinizing the media, the recruiting sources that companies, employers are using to source candidates. I think in this kind of a period, it really behooves everyone to pay close attention to sources that are working well, looking at past data, current data, to make sure that the companies that are doing well are the ones where you're continuing to invest resources, and really in a lot of ways relying on hard data to identify those sources that are working well. And that comes down to, again, making sure that you have systems and technologies and processes that allow you to get the kind of metrics that you need to really identify those sources that are working well. And then lastly, when you've identified those sources, that clearly are the places where budgets need to go, because those are working, they're working well, and those are the ones that I think can help companies successfully source candidates in this type of environment. But to be fair, too, I think in a lot of ways, it's also important to identify those sources that are also making tactical and strategic changes to the way they do business in this kind of an environment. I think, again, it's a pretty good sign of quality sources, quality partners of yours, when you have visibility into the kinds of that your partners, your media sources are making to adapt to this kind of an environment. And on that front, I'll just cover a couple of quick highlights of things we're doing at LinkUp to adjust very much equally challenging us as well in this type of an environment to source quality candidates in a full employment environment. So over the last couple of years, we have taken a significant number of steps to expand the reach of our sourcing. We are constantly expanding both the diversity and depth and breadth of our candidate pools. We want to make sure that we are dramatically increasing exposure to advertisers. We want to help them source from a broader and more diverse pool of candidates. We are dramatically expanding our use of data to optimize campaigns and provide relevant benchmarking data. And we're constantly improving our products and services to make sure that we're delivering a truly industry-leading value proposition for our clients. So again, I don't want to drill down too far into this, but again, it is just a highlight of a couple of things that we're doing to make sure that we are partnering with our clients to help them through what is clearly a very challenging time in this full employment environment. So with that, we'll open it up to some questions, and hopefully we can get to all of them.
Great. Thanks, Toby. Thanks a lot for all the engagement throughout the webinar. We do have some really good questions that I'll fire at you here, Toby. But if I don't get to yours specifically, again, like I mentioned, we'll follow up with you in the next day or two. This is definitely a topic that we're pretty passionate about and we'd love to have further dialogue on. So this first question really kind of goes back to what you were saying about the impact of HR. And the question is, generally, what phase would you say employers are in right now?
I think that's a good question. I think that we are probably right now somewhere in the second to third phase. I think, again, that as we start to see what has happened essentially is that wage inflation had been isolated to certain pockets, certain regions of the country, certain industries, and certainly particular job categories. As that has expanded to include really almost every industry today and all kinds of job categories up and down the entire economy, I think that wage inflation is really starting to be seen in a much broader way throughout the country. So I would say that we're in that third phase of wages and salaries really starting to grow over time.
And kind of on that, another question is somewhat related of any recommendations that you'd have to kind of help the talent acquisition and recruiter people help leaders understand the mandate for budget change. What can they do to kind of be an advocate that things need to change and increase salary, increase budget?
Right. I think from our standpoint, and this is an area that we have really focused on quite aggressively over the last year or so, and it really has been, I think the feedback we've had from our clients, it's been very helpful, is really looking at industry-wide benchmarking data. I think it's very frustrating when companies are seeing their budgets, their costs go up, cost per applicant go up, cost per hire going up, and it's hard to know whether that's isolated to themselves or whether that is a broader trend that is being seen throughout their industry that they're in. And so I think the first thing that I would recommend is really look for high quality benchmarking data. And again, and I'll take LinkUp as an example, we work with hundreds and hundreds of clients in essentially every industry in the economy. And as a result of that, we do have access to very good benchmarking data. Obviously, we keep the confidentiality of our clients' data very much confidential, but we do share benchmarking data in a generic way specific to job titles, job categories, and industry, and particular industries, which is really useful for companies to make use of as they're trying to weigh what they can expect from recruiting costs going up, cost per applicant, cost per hire kinds of metrics. Obviously, every employer is unique and has their own circumstances and situations, but I think there's a lot of value that can be gained from high-quality benchmarking data.
Great. I think we've got time for just a couple more. Here's a question that relates to our current employment situation. We're seeing different positives in job gains for quite some time. The question reads, are there specific areas of the country or industries where you're seeing contradiction from those numbers? So areas that are declining.
That is a good question. It's hard to, I think I'm not sure that I would say there are any cases that come to mind quickly in terms of declines. I think there are very much cases where certain industries the data is accelerating, that the labor demand is becoming more acute at a faster rate than other sectors. Clearly, healthcare, technology, transportation lead the way. I think more recently we've seen significant acceleration in demand in retail and hospitality sectors. Again, very, very broad-based across the entire country. So again, more and more, I think that the labor demand is really becoming acute really across the entire spectrum of the U.S. economy.
Okay, great. So the last question, definitely timely, kind of a hot topic, and bringing it into our webinar. Are you seeing any impact of the impending elections play into these indicators, either in support or against full employment?
That was one.
So keeping, opinions
aside.
aside.
I'll keep my own political views off the table, and it was one issue. It was sort of interesting whether we were going to put that as a bullet point in some of the slides. I think if I were to add a bullet point to the unknown slide when I was talking about alternative work arrangements, another one that could have easily been added to that was what impact the current political environment is going to have on both the economy and the labor market going forward. I think actually what is true, and I do believe it, and most people would indicate that because of that uncertainty around the political environment, that that uncertainty is probably net a more negative impact on economic outlook and potentially even business outlook for the future. No matter who wins in November, I think it is that uncertainty between now and then, and certainly even in a new administration coming in, what impact that might have, that uncertainty is maybe having a negative impact on business expansion, growth, investments, hiring, or that they're at least starting to think twice about pretty major expansions and investments that they might otherwise make in a different environment.
Good answer. Stay neutral. With that, thank you all for attending our webinar. Hopefully you were able to take something from it and be able to share it with some of your team. On that note, we have recorded the webinar, and we'll be sending out a link that you can also pass out to some colleagues. But thank you again, and we hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you, everyone.